The soft murmur of the Mayfair tea room drifted like a fragile veil over the porcelain, the silver, the rustling newspapers, and the practiced ease of London's most polished gossips. It was the hour when reputations were weighed alongside sugar cubes, and every raised brow could tilt the scales of a life. Lady Aurelia Penhurst stepped into that murmuring world with the poise of a woman who had learned to bear the scrutiny of others as though it were merely weather, cold, persistent, survivable. Yet beneath her serenity, there was an unmistakable tension, a quiet bracing as though each whisper might cut her anew. She was 27 and beautiful in a way that unsettled those who sought flaws in others to excuse the ones in themselves. And so, when she appeared in any room, society spoke. They always spoke. She is nearing 30, you know. She refused another offer this season. Pretty enough, but stubborn pride is unbecoming. Their murmurs drifted just loudly enough for her to hear, but quietly enough for them to pretend innocence. It was the ton's favorite cruelty, polished humiliation. On the far side of the tea room, Lord Edmund Rathbury lifted his gaze from his cup. He had chosen the corner table for its anonymity, yet anonymity was a fragile shield for a man whose political downfall had occupied London's chatter for an entire winter. Edmund was 32, finely made of bone and restraint, with eyes that revealed the bruises scandal had left upon his dignity. He had come for solitude, for the simple comfort of tea and unbothered breathing, but solitude was an elusive gift to any man once praised, then punished by society. Still, the moment he saw Aurelia, his stillness deepened. She moved not with the triumph of beauty but with the courage of a woman forced to navigate a world determined to misunderstand her. He noticed, too, the figure rising from another table. Viscount Locksley. His smile was thin and proprietary, the smile of a man who believed admiration and possession were synonymous. He had pursued Aurelia for years with the persistence of someone who desired not a wife, but a conquest. Edmund felt something shift within him, an instinct, faint but unmistakable, as Locksley strode toward her. Before Edmund could fully discern why, another figure moved faster. The Dowager Duchess of Penhurst, a woman whose spine seemed forged from equal parts lineage and grief, cut across the room with a swiftness that belied her age. There was a tremor in her gloved hand, a rare and telling sign. She reached Edmund's table, lowering her voice until it was almost a plea stitched with desperation. "My lord," she whispered, "I beg of you, pretend you're my daughter's fiancé." For a moment Edmund thought he had misheard her. The Duchess, the proud guardian of one of London's most notable families, was not a woman given to improvisation. Yet her eyes held a depth of urgency that struck him with force. She angled her head slightly, allowing Edmund a clearer view of Aurelia. Locksley was nearly upon her now, smiling as though he had already won some silent battle. Aurelia's back was straight, but her hands tightened around her reticule. Edmund's scandal had taught him to avoid entanglements at all costs. Yet there are moments in a man's life when instinct outpaces reason, when something quiet within insists that one should rise. He pushed back from the table. The Duchess released a breath she had not known she was holding. He crossed the room, each step deliberate, the eyes of the tea room turning toward him like a field of compasses finding north. Aurelia looked up as he approached, confusion flickering in her expression before discipline smoothed it away. Locksley halted mid-stride, taken aback by Edmund's unexpected intervention. "Forgive my delay," Edmund said softly to Aurelia, as though this were the most natural greeting in the world. "Shall we sit together?" Gasps whispering around the room testified that his words had landed exactly as the Duchess intended. Locksley's face tightened in anger, the mask of civility slipping. Aurelia, ever composed, inclined her head. "Of course, my lord," she replied, though the question in her eyes, "What are you doing?" was unmistakable. She followed Edmund to a nearby table, her movements graceful yet trembling at the edges. Once seated, she murmured without lifting her gaze, "My mother asked this of you?" "She did," he answered. "And I agreed." "Why?" The single syllable held the weight of a woman accustomed to carrying her burdens alone. Edmund considered his response. "Because you appeared in need of protection," he said quietly. "And because it cost me nothing to offer it." Aurelia's lashes lowered. "Protection is never without cost," she murmured. Across the room, the Duchess observed them with a mixture of gratitude and strain. Locksley, however, watched with cold calculation. His retreat was only temporary. Retreat was not in his nature. He bowed stiffly, but his voice carried just enough to be heard. "My congratulations, Lady Aurelia. How swiftly fortunes change." The implication, sharp, poisoned, settled over the tea room. Edmund felt the tension rise around them like tightening air. Aurelia lifted her chin. "Indeed, my lord," she said calmly, though color touched her cheeks. "Fortunes do change." A subtle shift passed between them, a fragile alliance born not of affection but of necessity, yet fragile things could grow unexpectedly strong. Edmund sensed it, sensed also that stepping into this ruse tied him irrevocably to a woman whose dignity struck him more profoundly than any beauty he had known. He had entered intending only to drink tea. Instead, he found himself stepping onto a battlefield where words, not swords, drew blood. Aurelia's fingers brushed the table edge, steadying herself. "My mother means well," she murmured, "but I fear she has entangled you in something you do not understand." "Then help me understand," he replied. She met his gaze fully then, eyes luminous with unspoken worry, and something unguarded passed between them. Then the door of the tea-room swung open again, cold air sweeping in, carrying with it a voice that made both Edmund's and Aurelia's expressions sharpen. "Lady Penhurst," the newcomer announced, "your past seems to be catching up with you." Aurelia flinched. Edmund turned. And there, framed in the doorway, stood a man holding a sealed envelope, one Locksley had sworn would destroy her. The man stood motionless in the doorway, the sealed envelope pinched between his gloved fingers as though it were nothing more than an errand, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed knowledge of its potential ruin. Edmund rose slightly from his seat, instinctively shielding Aurelia with the smallest shift of his body, a gesture so subtle that only she felt its protective intent. The tea-room fell silent, as if the clinking of porcelain itself held its breath. "I was asked to deliver this to Lady Aurelia Penhurst," the messenger announced, and though he spoke with the politeness of a paid servant, his gaze lingered too long, too curiously, as if sensing the spectacle unfolding before him. All eyes drifted to Aurelia, their whispers unspoken yet heavy in the air. Edmund watched her carefully. She did not shrink, though her breath hitched. She extended her hand with the poise of a woman refusing to tremble under 100 scrutinizing gazes. When she broke the seal, the paper inside crackled like distant fire. Edmund saw Locksley's expectation, thinly veiled triumph, glimmer in the periphery. Aurelia unfolded the letter, and though her expression remained controlled, a faint blanching of her cheeks betrayed something within the words. After a moment, she lowered the letter onto the table and lifted her chin with practiced grace. "It is nothing of consequence," she said, but her voice, steady though it was, held a quiver so slight most would not hear it. Edmund heard. The Duchess arrived at her daughter's side then, the whisper of her skirts a shield of maternal ferocity. She placed a hand on Aurelia's shoulder, a silent reassurance before turning her cool gaze toward Locksley. "My lord," the Duchess said, "this performance of yours grows tiresome." Locksley bowed, his smile thin. "I merely wish to ensure Lady Aurelia received what was hers." His tone dripped with feigned innocence. He glanced toward Edmund next, as though sizing a rival he had not anticipated. "It seems congratulations are in order," he murmured, though one wonders how long such an arrangement can withstand the weight of truth. Edmund felt the words aimed at him, sharp and deliberate. Aurelia's eyes flicked toward him, questioning, apologetic, though she had no fault in this sudden storm. He gave the smallest nod, a silent vow that he would not retreat. The Duchess ushered them away before further spectacle could ignite. In the dim privacy of their carriage, the situation shifted from public drama to suffocating intimacy. The Duchess leaned forward, her voice low. "Aurelia, my love, is it the same man?" Aurelia folded the letter tightly, as though compressing its power. "Yes," she whispered. "He means to use the past I refused him as a weapon." Edmund watched her closely. "Locksley?" She hesitated, then nodded. Yet it was not Locksley's name that carried the weight, rather the history attached to it. Edmund felt anger stir, not the wild anger of youth but the controlled fury of a man who understood the devastating power of rumor. The Duchess reached across to touch Aurelia's hand. "We will weather this," she said. "We always do." Aurelia smiled faintly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She glanced at Edmund. "My lord, I apologize for the continued inconvenience. You should feel no obligation to remain part of this illusion." Edmund regarded her fully then, studying the composed mask she wore, the fragile strength beneath. "What I should feel," he replied softly, "is not the same as what I do feel." Her breath stilled, uncertainty flickering through her expression. The Duchess cleared her throat, not unkindly. "We must appear united. At least until this threat passes." Before Edmund could answer, the carriage halted at a jeweler's storefront, an errand the Duchess had apparently planned. "Come," she said briskly. "If society is to believe this engagement, let us give them reason to talk." Inside, the jeweler's lamps glowed like miniature suns, illuminating glass cases of rings and trinkets. The Duchess instructed the jeweler to bring out a selection of modest engagement pieces. Aurelia's cheeks warmed as Edmund's presence at her side made the charade painfully real. "My lord," Aurelia murmured, "you need not." "I agreed to the role," Edmund said. "Let us play it convincingly." He chose not the largest ring nor the most ornate, but a simple gold band with a single sapphire. It was dignified, elegant, unlike anything Locksley might have offered her. Aurelia looked at it as though it were an anchor thrown into a storm. "Does it displease you?" Edmund asked. "No," she whispered. "It frightens me." He softened. "Allow me to bear some of that burden." The jeweler, oblivious to the gravity surrounding him, slipped the ring into a velvet case and congratulated them. Edmund paid quietly. The Duchess watched with a keen, almost hopeful gaze, as though witnessing something she had not dared imagine. When they stepped outside, the sky had darkened with the onset of dusk, lanterns flickering to life along the street. Carriages clattered past, and the scent of coal smoke drifted through the air. Aurelia walked with slow steps, clutching the velvet case as though it might ignite in her hands. "Edmund," she said softly, his given name slipping out before she realized it. She faltered, flustered. "My lord, forgive me." He stopped. "You may call me Edmund if it brings you ease." Her lips parted, stunned by the gentleness. "It does not bring ease," she admitted. "It brings something else." He would have asked what she meant, but fate intervened. As they stepped toward the carriage, a familiar voice cut through the evening air. "Well, well," Locksley drawled, stepping from the shadows. "How touching. A ring already?" Aurelia stiffened. Locksley's gaze dropped to the velvet case. "One wonders," he said, "whether Lady Aurelia told you why she refused every offer before yours, or what she promised me once upon a time." Edmund's blood ran cold. Aurelia inhaled sharply, her hand trembling. And Locksley smiled, the smile of a man holding a secret capable of shattering them all. The street lamps flickered uncertainly as Locksley's smile sharpened, that predatory curve meant to remind Aurelia of everything she wished forgotten. Edmund stepped slightly forward, a shield without touching her, and the subtle shift only deepened Locksley's satisfaction, as though provoking Edmund was a small sport he had long awaited. Carriages rattled past them, horses snorting clouds of mist into the night air, yet all the noise seemed to retreat from the gravity forming between the three. Aurelia steadied herself with a quiet inhale. "I promised you nothing," she said, her voice cool but fragile around the edges. "Not in words, perhaps," Locksley murmured, "but in sentiment. A lady's encouragement can be as binding as a vow." His gaze drifted deliberately to the velvet ring case in Aurelia's hand. "Though it appears you offer your affections quite differently these days." Edmund clenched his jaw, but his voice remained calm. "Whatever you believe Lady Aurelia owes you, I assure you she does not." "Oh." Locksley tilted his head as though in mock curiosity. "Yet she once sought my help, wrote to me, confided in me." His eyes glittered with cold amusement. "Do you truly think she has told you everything?" Aurelia went very still, and that stillness, more than fear, made Edmund's anger unfurl inside him like a storm. He reached for her hand, not to claim her but to steady her, offering quiet strength she had never been granted before. "We will not entertain your theatrics in the street," Edmund said. "Good evening, my lord." But as they turned away, Locksley's voice followed, low and poisonous. "The past does not vanish simply because you pretend to be in love." Aurelia froze. Locksley knew exactly where to strike. Edmund did not release her hand until they had reached the carriage, and when she finally sat inside, her posture sagged with careful exhaustion. The Duchess, already tense, leaned forward urgently. "What did he say?" Aurelia shook her head. "Only that he means to dredge up old wounds. He always has." Rain began tapping at the carriage roof as Edmund entered, and the sound felt like the sky echoing their turmoil. The horses lurched forward, and the lamps outside blurred into golden streaks against the darkness. Edmund watched Aurelia closely, noting the tremble she tried to hide by clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "You need not tell us anything you do not wish to," he said gently. "I should," she whispered. "For your sake." His brows drew together. "My sake." She met his gaze, eyes luminous in the dim light. "He will not hesitate to use whatever scraps of my past he can distort against you. Against our arrangement." She swallowed. "I would not have you suffer for something that was never your burden." Edmund felt the carriage sway beneath them, but his voice remained steady. "Whatever happened before is yours to share in your own time. Locksley's cruelty reveals far more about him than about you. Aurelia looked away, though her eyes shone with unspoken gratitude. The Duchess placed a hand over her daughter's, squeezing lightly. Locksley's ambitions have always been dark, the Duchess murmured. He believes refusing him was an insult he must avenge. He twists every memory to suit his pride. Aurelia nodded. I once asked him to intervene on my behalf in a matter regarding my father's creditors. I was desperate and young. He interpreted that plea as affection. Her breath quivered. He believed I owed him my future. Edmund's expression hardened, but he let her continue at her own pace. When I withdrew from his attention, Aurelia whispered, he warned me that society would side with him should he ever choose to tarnish my name. And he is a man who collects grievances as though they were priceless artifacts. Edmund leaned forward slightly, compelled by both concern and admiration. You bore that threat alone? What choice had I? She replied softly. A woman's reputation is a fragile currency. Once cracked, it shatters irreparably. I thought that by withdrawing quietly, by giving him no further reason to pursue me, he might turn his attention elsewhere. She closed her eyes briefly. I was wrong. The carriage rolled to a stop before the Penhurst residence, its lanterns casting long shadows across the portico. Rain fell steadily now, pattering against the stone like 1,000 whispered judgments. Edmund offered his hand to Aurelia as they descended, and though she took it lightly, he felt her steady herself through the contact. Inside the foyer, warm light spilled across marble floors, but the security of the house did little to ease the heaviness lingering around her. The Duchess excused herself to speak with the butler, leaving Aurelia and Edmund standing alone beneath the grand staircase. Today has placed you in an impossible position, she murmured, her voice scarcely above a breath. I would release you from it if I could. Edmund stepped closer, not enough to breach propriety, but enough that she felt his presence as a steadying force rather than an obligation. And abandon you to Locksley's schemes? Never. She looked up, startled. You barely know me. Perhaps, he said quietly, but I know injustice when I see it. And I know dignity worth defending. Her composure wavered then, a storm passing briefly across her eyes. I do not wish to bring more scandal to your name. Your presence brings none, he replied. Aurelia exhaled shakily, the tension in her shoulders loosening by a fragile degree. You are kinder than I deserve. Edmund held her gaze, his voice deepening with sincerity. Do not mistake cruelty suffered for guilt earned. She blinked, and for a heartbeat, he saw the woman behind the careful defenses, a woman frightened yet resilient, yearning for someone to believe her without hesitation. Before she could speak, a footman approached, bowing. My lady, a letter has arrived. Delivered urgently. Aurelia stiffened. Another letter. Another threat. She accepted it with trembling hands, her breath catching as she recognized the handwriting. Locksley's. Edmund saw her pale and stepped to her side as she broke the seal. The Duchess returned just in time to witness the unfolding dread. Aurelia unfolded the paper slowly, too slowly, and then her eyes widened, the blood draining from her face. It's an invitation, she whispered, barely audible. To what? Edmund asked. Her hand shook violently. To a supper he intends to host in my honor, and in yours. The invitation felt heavier than paper should allow, as though Locksley had pressed his triumph into the ink itself. Aurelia held it between trembling fingers, her breath caught at the edge of her ribs, unable to move forward or back. The Duchess read the card over her shoulder, her face darkening with each elegant, poisoned line. Edmund watched both women closely, sensing the storm tightening its grip around them. A supper in your honor, the Duchess murmured. This is no courtesy. It is a trap. Aurelia closed her eyes. He means to expose me before the entire room. He wants witnesses. Edmund's jaw tensed. Then we shall give him none of what he expects. Aurelia opened her eyes, shocked not by his certainty but by the quiet strength beneath it. My lord, he would humiliate me to humiliate you. He wants to show that your supposed fiancé is not the woman you believe her to be. Edmund stepped closer, lowering his voice to a warm, steady note. Lady Aurelia, he cannot shame you with the past when you stand unashamed in the present. Her composure wavered, a thin crack forming beneath her poised exterior. She turned away slightly, as though afraid he might witness the fear she had carried alone for too long. Rain tapped faintly against the windows, the night deepening in cold tension. We must attend, the Duchess said at last, her tone resigned. Refusing would feed his narrative. Aurelia nodded slowly. Then we will face him. But Edmund saw her fingers twist in the folds of her gown, the smallest tremor betraying what she would not voice. He stepped in front of her, compelling her gaze. "You will not face him alone." Her breath hitched. She lowered her eyes, unsure how to hold the warmth he offered. "I am grateful," she whispered. "More than I can say." The following evening arrived with the sharp chill of anticipation. Locksley's townhouse blazed with candles, each window glowing like a beacon for scandal. Carriages lined the curb, society's curious faces peering from velvet interiors. When Aurelia descended from her carriage, she wrapped her shawl tightly around her, but it was Edmund's offered arm she clung to, not for performance but for balance. Inside, the supper unfolded beneath towering chandeliers, the air thick with perfume, roasted pheasant, and sharpened interest. Locksley moved through the crowd like a man greeting guests to his own execution, not his but someone else's. When he saw Aurelia and Edmund enter together, his smile cut across the room like a blade. "My honored guests," he said, bowing deeply, though his eyes glittered with calculation. "You grace us with your presence." Edmund's voice was even. "Let us hope the evening is as it appears." "Oh, it will be far more illuminating than it appears," Locksley replied softly, then guided them to their seats with the ease of a man who believed he had already won. The first courses passed with an unsettling calm. Society watched the trio closely, forks paused midair whenever Locksley leaned forward to speak. Aurelia barely touched her plate, her stomach turning at the anticipation of the blow she knew was coming. Edmund, seated beside her, kept his voice gentle, coaxing her to breathe, to anchor herself. "You are not fragile," he murmured at one moment when their shoulders brushed. "You are merely exhausted from standing alone." Her lips parted, her eyes flickering with something like hope. "I do not know how to rely on another without fearing I will burden them." "Then perhaps," he whispered, "it is time you learned." But Locksley, observing them from across the table, raised his glass. "A toast," he announced. The room grew still. "To honesty," he said. "And to recognizing the truth of those we believe we know." Aurelia stiffened. The Duchess set her jaw. Edmund's hand brushed Aurelia's under the table, grounding her even as the air thickened with dread. Locksley called for a footman who placed a small lacquered box before him. He tapped it lightly, savoring the tension rippling through his audience. "Lady Aurelia," he said, "I have kept certain items of yours entrusted to me in the past. Sentimental tokens, you might say." Aurelia's breath faltered. Edmund felt the faintest tremor run through her. "She wrote to me," Locksley continued, "once upon a time. Letters filled with earnest request, and perhaps affection. I shall let the company judge." Edmund rose slightly, his voice low but firm. "You will not." Locksley smirked. "Afraid of the truth, Lord Rathbury?" Edmund stepped fully to his feet now, the quiet movement more commanding than a shout. "Afraid? No. Disgusted? Entirely. Whatever she wrote was in desperation, not devotion. And the fact that you twist her vulnerabilities into weapons reveals who you truly are." A hush swept the room. Locksley faltered for the briefest heartbeat, then recovered. "If that is so," he said, fingers easing open the box, "why not allow the letters to speak for themselves?" Aurelia rose abruptly, her voice breaking the tension like glass. "Enough." Her hands trembled, but her posture was straight, regal with a fury she had never allowed herself. "If you wish to embarrass me, my lord, do it openly. But do not pretend this is for the sake of truth." Locksley's smile grew sharp. "Then you admit there is something to reveal." She met his gaze without flinching. "I admit I once sought help from a man who mistook desperation for affection. Nothing more." Locksley reached into the box. But before he could withdraw the contents, Edmund moved, swift, controlled, and without hesitation. He laid his hand over Locksley's. "Do so," he said quietly, "and I shall expose the truth you fear most." Silence strangled the room. Locksley stilled. Edmund's voice dropped further, soft and lethal. "Shall I tell them what you did to the last woman who refused you?" A murmur shook the crowd. Aurelia's eyes widened. Locksley's color drained. And Edmund, calm, unwavering, held the room captive as he prepared to reveal a secret capable of toppling everything. A stunned silence swept the room, stretching taut as the chandeliers trembled in their chains, as though the very house sensed a truth about to be unburied. Locksley's hand tightened beneath Edmund's, trapped, unable to complete his triumphant gesture. His confidence waned, a flicker of unease crossed his features, then quickly hardened into defiance. Yet the whisper of fear, just a thread, was enough to shift the atmosphere. Guests leaned forward, eyes sharpening like hawks scenting blood. Edmund did not lift his voice, but its quiet weight carried farther than any shout. "Release the letters," he said, "and I will speak of Miss Cartwright." The name dropped into the room like an anvil. Locksley flinched. Aurelia felt the tremor of it ripple through her, though she did not yet understand who Miss Cartwright was. She only sensed that the Duchess stiffened beside her, recognition dawning in her eyes. Edmund continued, each word deliberate. "A young woman whose reputation you destroyed because she rejected you. A woman whose family was forced to leave London in disgrace. A woman you pursued relentlessly until she fled, believing herself worthless." Locksley yanked his hand away, the box nearly toppling. "You are inventing ghosts," he hissed. "Are we?" Edmund countered calmly. "Because I have spoken with her brother. He keeps every letter she wrote. Letters detailing how you twisted her refusals into accusations, how you convinced society she had acted indecently. You crushed her future to soothe your wounded pride." A sharp gasp broke from somewhere in the crowd. Locksley's face blanched. The Duchess found her voice. "So it is as we suspected," she said coldly. "Your interest in Aurelia is nothing but the same pattern, control disguised as affection." Locksley attempted to laugh, but the sound cracked. "You cannot prove any of this. The word of a ruined girl's brother is more credible than the word of a man attempting to blackmail a lady at his own supper," Edmund replied. His tone was calm, but beneath it lay a current of steel. "If you wish to test me, open the box. Make your move. I will make mine." The room held its breath. Locksley's fingers hovered over the lid, then withdrew. His bravado deflated visibly, replaced by simmering fury. He snapped the box shut with a sharp click. "This is far from over," he spat. Edmund's gaze did not waver. "On the contrary," he murmured, "it ends tonight." Aurelia's knees felt weak, not with fear but with the sudden revelation of how fiercely Edmund was willing to stand for her. She had imagined herself alone for so many years that this defense, public, unwavering, felt almost unreal. Locksley turned toward the crowd, attempting to salvage something of his dignity. "Lady Aurelia's past is her own affair," he said, forcing a thin smile. "I merely wished to clarify misunderstandings." But no one believed him now. The shift was palpable. Heads angled away from him, conversations resumed in cautious whispers, glances turned sympathetic toward Aurelia instead of scornful. His power, built on manipulation and the fragility of feminine reputation, crumbled beneath the weight of truth spoken aloud. As the supper resumed in fractured murmurs, Locksley's fury blistered the air. He excused himself with a stiff bow, his footsteps echoing through the hall like the retreat of a man suddenly aware that he had misread his opponent entirely. The moment he disappeared from sight, the Duchess exhaled shakily. "My dear girl," she whispered to Aurelia, "are you well?" Aurelia nodded, though her chest felt tight with the surge of emotions she had been restraining. She turned to Edmund, her voice soft as candle smoke. "You knew of Miss Cartwright?" "I learned of her only recently," he admitted. "But when I realized Locksley intended to use your past against you, I needed something that revealed the truth of his character." "You risked your reputation again?" Aurelia murmured, her eyes glistening. Edmund's expression softened. "Some risks are worth taking." The Duchess discreetly stepped away to speak with friends, leaving Aurelia and Edmund standing close enough that their breath mingled in the warm air. The room began to swirl with polite conversation once more, but neither of them moved. "You protected me," Aurelia said, her voice trembling with a sincerity she no longer wished to conceal. "Not as part of a performance. Not because my mother begged you. But because you wished to. Because you deserve protection," Edmund said quietly. "Not for appearances, not for convenience, but for your own sake." Her lower lip trembled. "I feared no one would ever believe me innocent. I feared that all it took was one man's accusation to define my life, as it has defined so many women's lives." "His lies will not define you," Edmund answered. "Not while I draw breath." Aurelia looked up at him, and in her gaze, he saw the fragile beginnings of trust. Trust hard-won, trust cautiously offered. It warmed something in him that had grown cold after his own scandal. The crowd thinned as the supper concluded, leaving only lingering clusters of guests who pretended not to observe the moment unfolding between them. Edmund extended his hand. "Walk with me?" he asked. She placed her fingers in his, surprised by how natural it felt. They moved to a quieter corner near the tall windows, where rain streaked the glass in bright lines. Candlelight cast gold upon Edmund's profile, revealing a gentleness she had not noticed before. "My lord," she whispered, "this engagement, this pretense, has become something dangerous. For you. For me." Not dangerous, he murmured. Transformative. Her breath caught. And what is it becoming? He hesitated. Only a heartbeat. Something I no longer wish to pretend. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. You mean? I mean, he said, stepping closer, that if tonight has taught me anything, it is that I wish to walk beside you not as a shield but as a partner. If you will allow it. Aurelia's eyes glistened with tender disbelief. She opened her lips to answer. But at that moment the doors to the supper hall burst open. A panting footman rushed toward them, face pale. My lady, he gasped, bowing frantically. A message just arrived. Urgent. It concerns your father's estate, and Lord Locksley's latest move. Aurelia's heart stopped. And Edmund's hand tightened around hers, ready for whatever storm awaited them next.